I built Ember from nothing. That is not a figure of speech. I mean, I built it from the actual ground up, with my actual hands, on a budget so thin that my accountant cried at our first meeting and again at our third. I found the space myself, a gutted former laundromat on Decatur Street that smelled like mildew and old disappointment, and I stood in the middle of that empty room and I saw what it could be. Not what it was. What it could be. My mother thought I had lost my mind. My sister flew in from Atlanta specifically to tell me in person that I was making a mistake. My best friend Tanya held my hand through every panic attack and told me she believed in me, which I later found out she was doing while quietly researching whether I could get my nursing license reinstated if the whole thing fell apart. I could not blame any of them. The numbers were terrifying. The risk was completely real. I was a 31-year-old black woman trying to open a fine dining restaurant on a street that had watched 4 businesses fail in the last 2 years. The odds were written on the wall in plain language, and I could read them perfectly well. I opened Ember anyway. 11 tables. A menu I had been writing in notebooks since I was 23 years old. Small refinements, new ideas, pages and pages of flavor combinations and plating concepts and notes on technique that I had been accumulating in the obsessive way of someone who is always preparing for a thing they believe is coming. A kitchen staff of 4 that I paid better than I paid myself for the first 8 months. Exposed brick walls that I sanded and sealed myself on 3 consecutive weekends because the contractor's quote was $1,500 and I had $1,500 I absolutely could not spare. Pendant lights above each table that I spent 2 weeks selecting, because the quality of light is the first thing you feel when you walk into a room, before the smell, before the sound, before anything else, and I needed it to feel exactly right. I understood light. I understood fire. I understood what it meant to transform something raw and unpromising into something that made people sit down and go quiet and feel, for the length of a meal, that they were somewhere that had been made specifically for them. That was what Ember was. That was what it did. By the end of the first year, we had a waiting list on Friday and Saturday nights that ran 3 weeks out. I used to read the reservation names before service, a habit I never explained to anyone, just something I did, learning who was coming, what they might need, what tonight should feel like for them specifically. By the end of the second year, a food critic from the Journal came in anonymously. I only knew who he was because Jerome, my sous chef, recognized him from a photograph at a conference 2 years earlier. We did not change what we were doing. We did not run out and buy better ingredients or pull out a special menu. I told Jerome and Jerome said, "Then we just cook," and he said it the way he said everything, like it was the obvious and only possible answer. The review ran on a Tuesday morning. 4 paragraphs. He wrote about the lamb, about the lighting, about what he called an almost unbearable sense of intention, like every decision in this room was made by someone who cares about you specifically. I read it standing at the kitchen pass, and then I sat down on the kitchen floor and I cried into a clean dish towel for about 15 minutes. Then I stood up and I finished prep for lunch service because the lamb was not going to plate itself. By the 3rd year we had been nominated for 2 regional awards, we had a corporate catering contract that covered 3 months of rent, and I was fielding calls from people who wanted to talk about expansion. Ember was mine. Every inch of it. Every decision and every late night and every moment when I was sure I could not continue and then continued anyway. I need you to understand what it was before I tell you what was done to it. I need you to understand what it felt like on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in October when the lunch service was finished and the kitchen was clean and the light was coming through the front windows in that particular golden way it did in the fall. I need you to understand what it felt like to stand in the middle of that room and know that you built it. That it was real. That you actually, against every reasonable odds and every reasonable fear, did the thing you said you were going to do. You need to understand all of that, so that you understand what the next part cost me. Marcus came into my life 8 months into year 2, on a Friday night at the bar. He came in with a group, 4 people, easy and loud in the way of people who are used to going out, who know how to take up space in a restaurant without being rude about it. He was the most at ease of all of them. He moved through the room with a comfortable confidence that I noticed from the kitchen, which is where I noticed most things, the kitchen being a position with a particular and useful view of everything. He came back the following Tuesday. Alone. He sat at the bar and he ordered the lamb, and then he asked if he could speak to the chef, which people occasionally did and which I occasionally indulged when service was light enough. It was a slow Tuesday. I came out. He talked about the food the way I talked about food. Not just appreciation, understanding. He understood why I had done what I had done with the sauce, what I was trying to create with the contrast of texture, what the dish was trying to say about the relationship between comfort and refinement. He talked about it like someone who had been thinking about food their whole life, which is the thing that got me, I think, not the attention, not the way he looked at me, but the fact that he was speaking my language with something like fluency. We dated for 7 months before he suggested the partnership. By that point, he had become a fixture at Ember in a way that felt natural because he had made it feel natural. He knew the staff by name. He understood the rhythms of service. He showed up without being asked and stayed without overstaying. And he was in finance, corporate finance, investments, structures, and instruments that I did not fully understand, which was relevant because I was at a point in Ember's growth where the financial side of the operation was beginning to exceed my capacity to manage it alone. Numbers were not my language. Numbers made my eyes cross. I was spending a meaningful amount of time every week on things that were not cooking, not running a kitchen, not doing the work that I was actually good at. Marcus said, "Let me handle that part. You focus on the food. That's what you're for." I should have noticed the way he said it. You focus on the food. That's what you're for. Like the kitchen was a room I lived in and the rest of the building was his. I filed the tone away. I filed it next to a dozen other small things I had been filing away for the past few months without examining them directly. Small inconsistencies in the books that Marcus had explanations for, a conversation I had overheard that had not quite made sense, the way he had looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, with something behind his eyes that I had not been able to name. I went home. Marcus was awake. He said he had seen the alerts. He said he was so sorry. He held me in a way that should have felt like shelter. It did not feel like shelter. It felt like a performance of shelter. I did not have language for the difference yet. I only knew that something in me would not soften into him the way it usually did. Something had gone rigid and watchful and would not come down. I sat in the shower until the water went cold. Then I got out and I found my blazer and I ironed the shirt I had planned to wear to the meeting. Marcus stood in the bathroom doorway and watched me. "What are you doing?" he said. "Getting ready," I said. "Keisha." "The restaurant just." "I have a meeting at 10, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. He did not try to stop me. The not trying to stop me, was a thing I turned over and over in my mind while I drove to Decatur Street that morning. He knew about the meeting. He knew it was with the CO group. And when I said I was going anyway, something in his face went very still, and then he nodded and went back to bed. I thought about that nod for a long time after. I arrived on Decatur Street at 9:55. I do not know exactly what I had expected. Some version of figuring it out on the sidewalk, calling Danny, finding a nearby coffee shop, improvising. I had not thought through the logistics carefully because I was running on something harder and more primitive than logic. A refusal. A flat refusal to let what had happened to Ember also take what came after it. I stood on the sidewalk and I looked at my restaurant in the morning light. Worse, in daylight. In daylight you could see everything the darkness had softened. The crack in my sign, the ember orange letters I had commissioned, the E hanging at a 45-degree angle. The black stain rising above each window like a tide mark. The caution tape moving in the morning wind. The sidewalk still dark from the water. I stood there and I looked at it. Then a black car arrived. It parked directly in front of the building in a no-parking zone with the unbothered certainty of a vehicle that did not concern itself with such distinctions. 2 men stepped out first. Not large, average height, average build, but they moved in a way that rearranged the space around them slightly, the way people move when they have been trained to be aware of every angle of a room. Then the back door opened. The man who got out was Korean, lean, mid to late 30s, dark eyes that moved across the scene ahead of him with quick, unhurried intelligence. Charcoal suit, expensive in the specific way that expensive things are when they have been made rather than just bought. Hair pushed back. No expression I could read at first look, just attention, complete, comprehensive attention on the building in front of him. He looked at the damage. He looked at all of it, the sign, the windows, the caution tape, the water stain on the pavement. He looked at it the way I looked at a new ingredient, like he was cataloging everything about it before making any conclusions. Then he turned and looked at me. He looked at my blazer, my laptop bag, the presentation deck tucked under my arm, and then he looked at my face, which was the face of a woman who had not slept, who had stood on this sidewalk at 3 in the morning watching the thing she built burn, who had ironed a shirt and driven back here at 9:55 with her deck under her arm because she was not going to let this stop the next thing from existing. He took in all of it. Then he said, quietly, "You kept the appointment." Not a question. "Yes," I said. He nodded. One small nod, like a confirmation of something he had already half expected. Then, "There is a cafe 2 blocks east. We will meet there." He turned. His men fell in behind him. I stood on the sidewalk for 3 seconds. Then I followed. His name was Ryan. He told me this at the cafe table the way he did everything, plainly, without performance. Just his name, set down like a fact. No last name. No title. No card produced. Ryan. Small cafe. Corner table. His men near the door. A bored barista who did not care who any of us were. Coffee that I wrapped both hands around because my hands had been cold since 3 in the morning and showed no signs of warming up. He said, "Tell me about the second location." Not, "I'm sorry about what happened." Not, "Perhaps we should reschedule." Not any of the things that would have been kind and reasonable and completely useless. "Tell me about the second location." Something in me went still, and then underneath the stillness, something unlocked. This was a man who understood the only thing that was going to help me right now, which was to not talk about what had already happened and to talk instead about what was still possible. I put my deck on the table. I talked for 45 minutes. I talked about the neighborhood I wanted, the specific blocks, the demographics, the gap in the market that I had identified and watched for 2 years. I talked about the space, the square footage, the ceiling height, the kitchen infrastructure I would need and why. I talked about the menu concept, which was related to Ember but not a copy of it, a different conversation in the same voice, a progression rather than a repetition. I talked about my numbers, Year 1 projections, Year 2, the staffing model, the supplier relationships I already had, the catering contracts I could bring with me. I talked about what I was going to build, not what I had lost. What came next? Ryan listened. He did not look at his phone. He did not glance at the door. He sat completely still across from me, and he listened the way some people listen, with a quality of attention that has actual weight to it, that you can feel directed at you like something physical. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your Year 2 projections. You're being conservative." "I know," I said. I'd rather exceed conservative than fall short of ambitious. Something happened at the edge of his mouth, the smallest possible acknowledgement of something. Then he said, "What happened to the first location?" His voice was the same, level, matter of fact. But I heard the specific shape of the question. Not asking about the fire. Asking about what caused it. "The investigation is ongoing," I said. He held my gaze. "But you know," he said. Not a question. He was watching my face and reading it accurately. "I have a strong suspicion," I said. He nodded. He looked at the deck and then back at me. Your business partner, he said. How long has he had operational control of the finances? I went very still. I had not mentioned Marcus. Not once in 45 minutes of presenting. How do you know about him? I said. I do due diligence before meetings, he said. I have reviewed your financials for the last 18 months. I know the structure of your partnership agreement. I know that 3 weeks ago, $40,000 was transferred from your operational account to a holding company that does not appear in any of your business filings. The cafe was warm. I had gone cold. I didn't know about the transfer, I said. I know you didn't, he said. That is why I am telling you. I looked at him across the small table. This man I had been sitting with for less than an hour. I looked at his face, controlled and still and completely direct, and I thought about the fire investigator's tone at 4 in the morning, about the nod Marcus had given me in the bathroom doorway, about 11 months of books I had never looked at closely enough, $40,000, a holding company I had never heard of, a fire that happened the night before a meeting that Marcus knew about. The thing in my chest that cracked open did it quietly, without drama, like a fault line that has been under pressure for a long time finally finding its release. I sat across from this man and I held my face steady. Tell me what you know, I said. He told me everything that he had determined was mine to know. Marcus had been systematically stealing from Ember for 11 months, not in large dramatic movements, in small consistent ones, designed to stay beneath every threshold that might have triggered my attention even with my limited financial oversight. Built through shell structures and holding companies, layered in a way that required real expertise to construct. The 40,000 was the largest single movement. It had gone into a holding company that was, through 2 further layers, connected to a real estate investment Marcus had been quietly building for the better part of a year. A property acquisition, on his behalf, with my money, built on my 3 years of work. I sat and listened and said nothing. When he was done I said, "The fire." He paused. "The investigation will confirm arson within the week," he said. "The origin point is the storage room adjacent to the kitchen. The accelerant pattern is inconsistent with accident. The sprinkler system was disabled, in a way that required specific knowledge of the configuration." I closed my eyes. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. I opened them. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. "You came to assess an investment. This information doesn't change your investment decision." He looked at me steadily. "You built something real," he said. "Someone destroyed it deliberately. You came to this meeting the morning after it burned with your presentation under your arm." He paused. "I am telling you because you deserve to know. And because the person responsible is still in your home, and I think you should know that before you go back to it." I looked at this man, at his face, at the complete absence of anything extraneous in it, no pity, no performance, no agenda that I could see beyond what he had just stated plainly. I said, "Are you going to fund the second location?" Something moved across his face, something I could not fully name. "Yes," he said, "whatever you need to rebuild." I nodded. I packed up my deck. I stood up. "Thank you," I said, "for the meeting, and for the rest." I walked out. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. I did not cry. I made a list, ordered, specific, actionable. The lawyer I trusted. The bank records I needed to pull immediately. The meeting I needed to request with the fire investigator. The conversation that had to happen when I got home. Then I drove home. Marcus was in the kitchen. I set my bag down. I looked at him. I said, "I need you to leave." He looked at my face. He left. The investigation confirmed arson within 6 days. Marcus was arrested the following Tuesday morning. He called from jail. I did not answer. His lawyer called. My lawyer handled it. The money, the full 11 months, the 40,000, all of it was attached to the criminal case. My lawyer was realistic. Recovering it would be a long process with uncertain outcomes. The insurance claim was separate, also ongoing. What I had immediately was the building, which the structural engineer told me was sound and fully salvageable. What I had was Jerome showing up at my door on Wednesday evening with a box of food he had cooked himself, sitting in my kitchen for 3 hours, sketching layout ideas on the back of a takeaway receipt. What I had was a phone call from Ryan. 3 days after the arrest. An unsaved number. Something made me answer. He said, "How are you?" Not a question, a real inquiry with weight behind it. I almost said fine. I almost said managing. I said, some days are better than others. A pause. That's honest, he said. I'm told it's a fault. It's not a fault, he said. And then, I want to show you a space. When you're ready. There's no urgency. The offer stands whenever you decide. I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. The ordinary Thursday afternoon of it. A woman walking a dog. 2 kids on a stoop. I can do Friday, I said. A beat. Friday, he said. I'll send the address. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen and I felt something shift. 1 degree, just 1 degree, towards something that was not grief or rage or the particular exhaustion of having been betrayed by someone you trusted. 1 degree toward what came next. Ember was gone. What I was going to build next was not gone. It had not even started yet. And on Friday, I was going to go see what it could be. Subscribe. Because what happened when I walked through that door on Friday is not something I can describe in a sentence. What Ryan showed me. What he said when I stood in the middle of that space and went quiet the way I went quiet in the laundromat on Decatur Street the first time, the going quiet of someone who can see what a thing could be. I did not sleep well the night before Friday. That was not unusual. I had not slept well in the 2 weeks since the fire, since Marcus, since all of it. Sleep had become a thing I did in short, interrupted stretches, waking at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning with lists running through my head, and the smell of smoke in my memory that I could not fully wash out no matter how many times I showered. But the night before Friday was different. It was not grief keeping me awake. It was something else, something closer to the feeling I used to get the night before a big service. The specific aliveness of being on the edge of something. I lay in the dark and I thought about the space he wanted to show me. I thought about the way he had said it on the phone. I want to show you a space. Not, I have found you a location. Not, I think I have something that might work. I want to show you a space. The specificity of it. The sense that he had already been thinking about what I needed before he called. I thought about the cafe table. The way he had listened. The way he had said, "Tell me about the second location," not, "I'm sorry about what happened," and how that one choice had been exactly the right thing, the only useful thing, and how he had known that without being told. I got up at 5:30. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and I wrote down everything I could remember about what I had said in that cafe. My own pitch, the details, the vision, so that I would not lose any of it. So that when I walked into that space on Friday, I would have it all inside me, fresh and ready. Then I got dressed. Then I waited for the address he had said he would send. It came at 8:15. An address in a neighborhood I knew, not the one I had been scouting for the second location, a different one. Older buildings. Wide sidewalks. The kind of street that still had the bones of what it used to be before several decades of varying fortune. I drove there. The building was on the corner of Meridian and 6th. I parked across the street and I sat in my car for a moment and I looked at it. It was larger than I had expected. A two-story building with a commercial ground floor, the kind of space that had been a restaurant once. You could see it in the proportions, the wide front windows, the ghost of a sign above the door where lettering had been removed and left a pale rectangular shadow on the brick. The second floor had arched windows. The building was old and had not been occupied recently, but it was not in disrepair. It had the look of something that had been maintained without being used, which was different and better. Ryan was already there when I crossed the street. He was standing in front of the building with his hands in the pockets of a dark coat, different from the suit, slightly more casual, though on him casual still looked like a decision rather than an accident. Two men behind him at a distance. He was looking up at the building the way he had looked at the ruined ember, with that complete, unhurried inventory. He heard me approach and turned. He looked at my face. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No," I said. He nodded, like this was reasonable information. Then he turned back to the building. "It was a restaurant," he said. 19 years ago. The family that owned it moved. It has been in the same ownership since, commercial holding, leased occasionally for storage, never returned to use. "Why not?" I said. He looked at me sideways. "Because the right person had not seen it yet," he said. He said it plainly, not as a line. As a fact he had already concluded. He produced a key from his coat pocket and unlocked the front door and pushed it open. I walked in. The first thing was the light. The front windows were large, floor to ceiling, original, the old wavy glass that you do not find in new construction. The morning light came through them and fell across the raw concrete floor in long warm rectangles that shifted slightly as clouds moved outside. Dust particles moved in the light. The ceiling was high, 14 feet, exposed beams, the bones of the original structure visible and beautiful in the specific way that old things are beautiful when they have been left alone long enough to become honest. I stopped just inside the door. I stood there and I looked at the light. Ryan came in behind me and stopped a few feet back. He did not say anything. He did not start pointing out features or walking me through dimensions. He just stood back and let me look. I walked forward slowly. The space was larger than ember. The main floor was easily twice the footprint, not too large, not the impersonal acreage of a space that had lost its intimacy, but large enough. There was an alcove to the left that had been a bar once, the original counter still there, dark wood, worn smooth at the edges. At the back, where the kitchen had been, the infrastructure was still partially in place. Ventilation, utility connections, the bones of what had been a serious cooking operation. I walked to the kitchen area. I stood in the center of it. I looked up at the ceiling. I looked at the walls. I looked at the window in the back wall. Small, facing a courtyard, the kind of window that would give kitchen staff a view of something green during service. I thought about the kitchen at Ember. The layout I had spent months perfecting, the flow of it, the way I had placed each station so that the movement of a service was like a kind of choreography, efficient and intentional and almost beautiful to watch from the right angle. I thought about how I would do it differently here. What I had learned at Ember that I would carry forward. What I would not repeat. What this space was asking for, specifically, that no other space would ask for in the same way. I was there for a long time. At some point I became aware that I had been standing still for several minutes and that Ryan was still in the main room, still not saying anything, still just present. Waiting with a quality of patience that did not feel like impatience being suppressed. Actual patience. The kind that comes from not needing the moment to be over. I walked back out to the main floor. The ceiling height, I said. Can the pendant lighting run from the original beams? Yes, he said. The structural engineer confirmed the beams will support it. I looked at him. You had a structural engineer look at this before you called me. Not a question. I had several people look at this before I called you, he said. I wanted to be certain before I showed you something that would not work. I turned and looked at the front windows again. The light. How long have you had this building? I said. A pause that was just slightly longer than his usual pauses. 8 months, he said. 8 months. Before the fire. Before Marcus was arrested. Before the meeting at the cafe that had been supposed to happen inside Ember. 8 months ago, this man had been holding a building. I turned back to him. You were planning this before we met, I said. I was planning to offer Ember the space to expand into, he said carefully. The meeting was always intended to lead here if it went the way I expected. And if it hadn't gone the way you expected? He held my gaze. It went the way I expected, he said. I stood in the middle of the room I was going to rebuild my life in, and I looked at this man who had been one step ahead of everything and had said nothing about it until I was standing in the right place to hear it. I said, "What do you want from this? From all of it? What is the actual arrangement?" He was quiet for a moment. 40% of the second location, he said. Silent partner. No operational input, no creative decisions, no involvement in the running of the restaurant. The money is yours to use as you see fit for the build. I want quarterly financial reporting and the option to renew the partnership at the end of year 3. That's it, I said. That's it, he said. I looked at the light on the floor, the long warm rectangles of it. Why? I said. Not the business why, the other why. He looked at me for a long moment. Because you kept the appointment, he said. And because what you built the first time deserved better than what happened to it. And because. He stopped. Because. I said. He looked at the window, then back at me. Because I would like to see what you do with it, he said. With a room that nobody has burned. I held that for a moment. Then I said, I want 50% or nothing. Silent partner, your terms. But 40 feels like a discount on what this will become, and I don't take discounts. Something happened in his face. That thing at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of a consideration of a smile. 45, he said. Done, I said. We shook hands in the middle of an empty building full of morning light. It was the most professional handshake of my life and also, though I did not know it yet, the beginning of something that would rearrange me entirely. The rebuild took 4 months. 4 months is a long time when you have nothing to do but build. I mean that, when you are not running a restaurant, when the thing that has consumed every hour of your adult working life has been stripped away and you are suddenly standing in an empty calendar, the days are very long and very loud with their own silence. I filled them with the build. I was at the Meridian and 6th site every single day. Not supervising from a distance, inside it, working. I had hired a contractor, a woman named Pat who had done 3 restaurant builds in the city and who, when I showed her my kitchen layout sketches on our first meeting, spent 20 minutes asking me questions and then said, "You've done this before," and I said yes, and she said good, "So have I," and we understood each other immediately. Jerome came every day too. He was between jobs. He had turned down 2 offers since Ember because, he told me without elaborating, he was waiting to see how this went. I did not take that lightly. Jerome had a family. Jerome had bills. Jerome was betting on me with something real. I did not forget that. We argued about the kitchen layout for 3 weeks. Productive arguing, the kind where both people know what they are doing and are working toward the same thing from different angles. Jerome wanted the pass moved 18 inches to the left. I wanted it where I had originally drawn it. We built a mock-up out of plywood and cardboard in the empty space, and we both walked it about 30 times each before I admitted he was right about the 18 inches, and he accepted this victory with appropriate humility, which is to say he said nothing about it for the rest of the day, and then mentioned it twice the following week. Ryan came on Tuesdays. Not every Tuesday, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. He would arrive mid-morning, look at the progress with that same comprehensive attention he gave to everything, ask 1 or 2 questions that were always precisely the right questions, and then stand somewhere out of the way and watch the work for a while before leaving. He never stayed long. He never got in the way. He never offered opinions about things that were not his to have opinions about. But he came. Every few weeks he came. And I noticed. I noticed the way he looked at the space, not like a landlord or an investor checking his asset, but like someone watching something come into being that he wanted to see come into being. There was something almost personal in it that I did not have language for yet. I noticed the way he sometimes watched me when he thought I was not looking. Not with hunger, with attention. The way someone watches a thing they find genuinely interesting. I noticed that I was thinking about Tuesday more than the other days of the week. I noticed all of this and I filed it away and I focused on the build because the build was what mattered right now. The build was the only thing that mattered. Everything else was secondary until the build was done. That was what I told myself. I believed it for about 6 weeks. The conversation that changed things happened on a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after the October Tuesday when I had stood in Ember alone at closing time and felt, for a moment, that I had done it. I did not know it was the anniversary when I woke up that morning. I only realized it when I was standing in the middle of the new space and something in the quality of the light, the way October light moves, the specific angle of it in the late morning, hit me somewhere under my ribs and I stood very still for a moment and let it. Ryan arrived at 11. He found me standing in the main room with my arms crossed and my eyes on the front windows. Pat and her crew were working at the back. Jerome was somewhere in the kitchen. It was loud with construction and I was standing in the middle of it being completely still. He came and stood beside me. Not in front, not across, beside. Looking at the same windows. He did not ask what I was thinking. He just stood there. After a while I said, "It's a year today. Since the fire." "I know," he said. I looked at him. "You know." "Yes." I turned back to the windows. "I keep thinking I should feel something specific about it," I said. "Sad or angry or resolved or something with a clear name. But mostly I just feel." I stopped. "Like you're still in it," he said. "Still building your way out. Not looking back because looking back doesn't help and not all the way forward yet because you're not there yet." I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "Exactly that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not a problem," he said. "That's just where you are. It's not the same as being stuck." I did not say anything. He said very quietly, "You're not stuck, Keisha." It was the first time he had used my name. In all the weeks of Tuesdays and phone calls and working in the same space and drinking coffee from the cart on the corner, in all of that, he had not used my name. He had referred to me in conversations with other people as Ms. Carter. He had addressed me directly without using a name at all. I had noticed the absence of it the way you notice a skipped beat, not consciously, but somewhere underneath consciousness. And now he said it. In the middle of a construction site, beside a window full of October light. Something shifted. Quietly and irrevocably and without fanfare. I turned and looked at him properly. At his face, which I had been looking at for 4 months but which I looked at now with something different, like a focus being adjusted to the right distance. "Why are you doing all this?" I said. Not the business question. The other one. The one I had asked in this same empty room 4 months ago and gotten a partial answer to. He held my gaze. "I told you why," he said. "You told me part of it," I said. A long pause. Long enough that I thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "The morning you kept the appointment. You had not slept. You had been standing on a sidewalk watching your restaurant burn 4 hours earlier. And you came. With your deck under your arm. And you sat across from me in that cafe and you talked about what you were going to build like the fire had not happened. Like it was simply the next thing to get through on the way to where you were going." He paused. "I have been in rooms with powerful people my entire adult life," he said. I have sat across from people with armies behind them, and I have not felt. He stopped. He was not a man who struggled for words. The stopping meant something. You felt what? I said softly. He looked at me. Like I was in the presence of something real, he said. Something that does not perform. That just is. The construction noise behind us was loud and ordinary. Somewhere in the kitchen, Jerome dropped something metal and swore. I stood in the middle of all of it, and I looked at Ryan. I said, I need you to understand something. I trusted the wrong person. I gave someone control of something I had built, and he used it to take from me. That has not made me afraid to trust. I do not want to be a person who is afraid to trust, but it has made me very clear about what I will not do again. I will not let someone stand beside something I am building and call it theirs. I will not look away from the financial details again. I will not assume that a person is what they perform to be. He listened. I know what you are, I said. I know the shape of your life. I am not asking you to be something different. I am telling you what I am. So that if this, whatever this is, continues to be something, you know who you are dealing with. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I know who I'm dealing with. I have known since the cafe. Then we understand each other, I said. We understand each other, he agreed. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then he said, the coffee cart closes at noon. We should go before it closes. I laughed. A real one, sudden, surprising me. He watched me laugh with that look on his face. The one I was beginning to understand was the closest he regularly came to showing what was happening inside him. We went to get coffee. It developed the way things develop between people who are both very careful and who have both, in different ways and for different reasons, learned to treat trust as something that has to be earned rather than assumed. Slowly, with long pauses and careful sentences and a great deal of space given on both sides. He told me things on the construction site Tuesdays that I understood he did not tell people. Not confessions. Ryan was not a man who confessed, who unloaded, who looked for absolution. He told me things the way he did everything, precisely, deliberately, with a sense that he had decided to tell me this specific thing and had thought about when and how to say it. He told me about Busan, his father, the kind of man who makes the word father into a complicated and specific wound. The leaving at 17. The years between 17 and the version of himself I was looking at now, which he described in broad strokes, without detail, and which I understood to be an entire education in a world that most people never enter and fewer survive with anything intact. He told me that he had built what he built not because he had wanted power for its own sake, but because he had learned very early that powerlessness was the most dangerous state a person could be in, and that the specific powerlessness of being young and poor and without resources or connections or anyone to call was a thing he had decided he would never experience again and had organized his entire life around preventing. That sounds exhausting, I said. He looked at me. It is, he said. Simply. Like he had never said it to anyone before, and the simplicity of saying it surprised him. I told him things too. About my mother, the complicated love of a woman who was proud of me and terrified for me in equal and simultaneous measure. About the years before Ember when I was cooking in other people's kitchens and watching how they made their decisions and filing away everything I would do differently. About Marcus, not the anger of it, I had done most of that in private, but the specific lesson of it, the thing I had learned about myself that I had not known before. What did you learn? He said. That I am capable of seeing what I want to see, I said. That wanting something to be true is its own kind of blindness. That I have to be as rigorous about the people in my life as I am about the food I put on a plate. He was quiet. That's harder, he said. With people. They don't hold still the way ingredients do. No, I agreed. They don't. He looked at me. I hold still, he said. And then, immediately, that was a strange thing to say. I smiled. It wasn't strange, I said. It was honest. He looked away, back to the building, but the corner of his mouth did the thing. 3 weeks before the restaurant opened, his world found mine. I had known it might. I had thought about it, not obsessively, not in the way of someone manufacturing anxiety, but clearly the way you think about a risk you have decided to accept. Ryan's life was not a clean life. I had looked at that directly, without looking away, and I had decided that the wholeness of him, the real him, the full picture, was something I was choosing. Still, when it actually arrived, it was different from imagining it. I was at the restaurant alone, late afternoon. The crew had gone for the day. Jerome had left an hour earlier. I was doing what I did most evenings when the site was quiet, walking the space, standing in different positions, imagining service. Imagining the tables full and the kitchen running and the light doing what I had designed it to do. The front door opened. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. 2 men came in. Not Ryan's men. I knew Ryan's men by now, their particular way of moving, the specific quality of their stillness. These were different. Older. They had a different energy, something harder, less disciplined. The one in front said, "You're Ryan's partner." Not a question. I stood very still in the middle of my restaurant, my half-built restaurant, the sawdust still on the floor, the pendant lights not yet hung, the kitchen not yet equipped, and I looked at them. "I'm the owner," I said. "This is private property." The door was locked. "We're aware," the man said pleasantly. The pleasantness was a tool, not a feeling. I recognized it. It was the same instrument Lim had used with Brianna, though I did not know that story. I recognized it from somewhere older. The sound of someone who has learned that calm is more frightening than anger. "Tell Ryan that the conversation he's been avoiding is going to happen whether he agrees to it or not," the man said. "And that the people he cares about are easier to find than he might prefer." He looked around my restaurant. "Nice place," he said. "Almost finished." They left. I stood in the middle of the space for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and I called Ryan. He answered in one ring. "2 men were just in the restaurant," I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. "They came through a locked door. They had a message for you." 3 seconds of silence. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Don't move. I'm coming." He was there in 22 minutes. He came through the front door, which had been relocked. I did not ask how his men had managed that, and he looked at me first. The full read, top to bottom, checking. Then he looked around the space. I told him what had been said, word for word. His face did not change, but his jaw tightened in that barely visible way, and I had learned by now that that was significant. "Who are they?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Someone who believes I owe him something I have already declined to give," he said. "Someone who has decided to make that point through other means." "Through me?" "Yes." I looked at him directly. "I need to know what we're dealing with," I said. "Specifically. Not the broad strokes version." He looked at me for a long time. Then he sat down on one of the construction sawhorses. Ryan, in his suit, sitting on a sawhorse in my half-built restaurant, and he told me specifically. It took a long time. I sat on another sawhorse across from him, and I listened to all of it. The name, a man named Cho who had been a rival for a long time, and who had recently become emboldened by a shift in certain regional arrangements that I did not need to understand in detail. What Cho wanted. Why Ryan had refused. What refusing meant in the world Ryan operated in. "What happens now?" I said when he was done. "Cho will be handled," he said, in that quiet, flat voice that left no room for questions about what handled meant. "And the restaurant?" I said. Not from fear, from pragmatism. From needing to know what I was planning around. "The restaurant opens," he said. "On schedule. Nothing about this changes that. I held his gaze. Are you certain? Yes. One word. Completely flat. Completely certain. I had learned by now that when Ryan said yes in that specific tone, it was because he had already made it true in the relevant ways and was simply informing me of the outcome. I breathed out. He looked at me, still sitting on the sawhorse, his expensive coat slightly dusty from the construction site, completely undignified by his usual standards and completely unbothered by it. I should not have let this reach you, he said. I thought I had more time before Cho became direct. I was wrong about the timeline. You were wrong about the timeline, I said. Not about everything else. He looked at me. No, he said. Not about everything else. We sat on the sawhorses in my half-built restaurant for a while longer. The evening light coming through the front windows, the old wavy glass, the long warm rectangles on the unfinished floor. The kitchen behind us quietly waiting to become what I was going to make it. He did not leave for a long time. Neither did I. The restaurant opened on a Thursday. I almost named it Ember. I thought about it for a long time, the tribute of it, the defiance of it, the satisfaction of standing the thing back up under the same name that Marcus had tried to destroy. But in the end, I did not. Ember was what I had built the first time. This was something different, not a replacement, not a reconstruction, but a continuation. Built on the same foundation but taller, clearer. Made by someone who had been through something and come out the other side with more knowledge than she had gone in with. I named it Meridian, after the street, after the corner where Ryan had unlocked a door and I had walked in and stood in the light and known. Opening night was fully reserved. 42 covers. I had been conservative with the opening, only 42 covers, not the full capacity of the space, because I wanted the first service to be perfect and perfect required control, and control required not overextending on night one. Jerome had agreed with this. Pat had said, smart. Ryan had said nothing, which meant he agreed. I arrived at the restaurant at noon on Thursday. I stood in the middle of the dining room and I looked at it. The pendant lights, warm amber, the same quality of light I had had at Ember but hung from the original beams, which gave them a different weight, a more deliberate feel. The tables, 12 of them, more than Ember, spaced generously. The bar in the alcove, the original wood counter restored and gleaming. The front windows with their old wavy glass, the afternoon light coming through them the way I had stood here 4 months ago and understood it would. The kitchen, my kitchen, Jerome's kitchen, the layout that had won the plywood and cardboard argument, waiting behind the pass, everything in its place, every station exactly where I had decided it should be. I stood there for a long time. Jerome came and stood beside me. Well, he said. Well, I said. We stood there together in the room we had built. He's coming tonight? Jerome said. He did not say who he meant. He did not need to. Yes, I said. Good, Jerome said. And then he went back to the kitchen because Jerome communicated primarily through brevity and the quality of his cooking, and occasionally through the perfectly timed single word. I went to change into my chef whites. Ryan arrived at 8 o'clock. He came in alone. No men at the door tonight, which I noticed and which meant something, though I did not examine it until later. He was in a dark suit, as always, but there was something different about him tonight. Something slightly less armored. I noticed it the way I noticed small things about him now, as a matter of course, as a function of having paid attention for 4 months. The host, a young woman named Camille who had worked with me at Ember and who I had called first when I started hiring, brought him to the table I had reserved at the window. The best table. The one where the light from the pendant above would be exactly right and where you could see both the dining room and the street outside. I came out of the kitchen between courses. I sat across from him, still in my chef whites, which I never usually did. Going to a table in whites meant leaving the kitchen, and the kitchen was where I belonged during service. But tonight I sat across from him and I looked at his face in the light of meridian. "Well," I said. He had just finished the lamb. The same lamb as Ember, my lamb, the dish the critic had written about, rebuilt here with what I had learned in the year between. Jerome had said it was better. I thought it was better. I wanted to know what Ryan thought. He looked at me. "It's better than the photograph," he said. I stared at him. "What photograph?" He reached into his jacket pocket and he placed something on the table. A printed photograph, small, slightly creased at one corner. A photograph of the lamb dish from Ember, taken during service, the quality of someone who had been sitting at one of my tables and photographed their food. "You ate at Ember," I said. "3 times," he said. I looked at the photograph, then at him. "Before the meeting?" "Yes. You came to my restaurant 3 times before we met." "I needed to understand what I was investing in," he said. Then, after a pause, "And then I kept coming back because the food was—" He stopped. "Because the food was what?" I said. He looked at the photograph on the table, then at me. "Like something made by a person who believes what they are doing matters," he said. "That is not as common as it should be." I sat across from him in my chef whites in my restaurant on opening night, and I felt something I had been keeping at arm's length for 4 months finally stop being held. I said, "Ryan." He looked at me. I said, "Thank you. For the building. For the Tuesday mornings. For knowing when not to talk and when to. For saying my name in a construction site in October." He was very still. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I know I don't," I said. "I'm doing it anyway." He looked at me for a long moment. The dining room was full around us. 42 covers, every table, the sound of it like a particular music I had been waiting to hear again for a year. He reached across the table and he put his hand over mine. One hand. Still. Warm. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Cho was handled, as Ryan had said he would be. I did not ask the details. I knew the outcome. The men did not come back to Meridian. The locked doors stayed locked in the normal way. The specific watchfulness that had been present in Ryan's demeanor for the weeks after the visit slowly, barely perceptibly, released. I noticed the releasing. I noticed the way he breathed differently when he came to the restaurant in December than he had breathed in November. I noticed it and I did not comment on it, and I understood that this was one of the things that loving someone who lived in his world was going to require, the ability to hold information without needing to process it out loud, to know without demanding to know everything. I was learning to do that. It was not always easy. I am, fundamentally, a person who wants to understand things completely. But I was learning the difference between the need to understand and the need to control, and learning that the second one is the one to be suspicious of. Meridian got its first review in January. A local blog first, then a larger outlet. By February, we had a waiting list on weekends. By March, I was fielding calls about a third location, and I was laughing at myself because the third location conversation felt almost familiar, the shape of it, the specific hopeful terror of it, and also completely different, because I was not the same person who had fielded those calls before. Ryan did not come every Tuesday anymore. He came whenever he came, which was sometimes twice a week and sometimes once a month and never with announcement, because he was a man who operated on his own schedule and who had learned that I was a woman who did not require his presence on a fixed timetable and who preferred his company when it was genuine rather than dutiful. We had figured each other out. Slowly and carefully, and with the particular attention of 2 people who have both been, in different ways, let down by people they trusted and who have therefore developed rigorous and personal standards for what trust actually means. We had met those standards. Somehow, through a burned restaurant and a cafe table and an empty building full of morning light and a sawhorse conversation and an opening night and a photograph of a lamb dish, we had met each other's standards. That was not a small thing. I did not treat it like a small thing. There is a moment in the kitchen, when you know a dish is right. Not when it is technically correct. Technically correct is a baseline, not an achievement. The moment I mean is the one where all the components have found each other. Where the thing on the plate is no longer separate elements arranged attractively but something unified, something where the whole is so clearly greater than its parts that you can feel it before you taste it. That moment, when it comes, is unmistakable. You just know. That is what Ryan was like. Not immediately, not at the cafe table or in the empty building or even on the October Tuesday in the construction site. Those were the components finding each other. The moment I mean came later, quietly, on an ordinary night at Meridian when we were in the kitchen after service, just the two of us, the crew gone, the restaurant quiet, and he was sitting on the counter watching me taste something from a spoon and he said, completely without preamble, "I think this is the best I have felt in a very long time." He said it the way he said things when they were true, simply, without performance, with a slight quality of surprise that real honesty sometimes carries. I looked at him sitting on my kitchen counter in his suit. I said, "Me too." And that was when I knew. Not everything is a grand moment. Some of the most important things happen in an ordinary kitchen on an ordinary night between two people who have both been through enough to recognize, without needing to dramatize it, what it means to be somewhere real. I was somewhere real. So was he. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was, if I am being completely honest, more than I had known to hope for when I was standing on a sidewalk a year ago watching everything burn. I had not known then that what I was losing was clearing the way for something I would not have had the room for if Ember had still been standing. I could not have known that. You never know that from inside the burning. You only know it later. Standing in the kitchen of the thing you built from the rubble, with someone beside you who showed up when you had nothing, who said, "We are still meeting," who held a building for 8 months because he believed in what you were going to do with it, who came to your restaurant 3 times before you met and kept a photograph of a lamb dish. You only know it from here, from the other side of the fire. And from here I can tell you, it is worth it. Every burning, every rebuilding, every morning you iron your shirt when you have every reason not to. It is worth it.